So last week, I saw Wake Up Dead Man, the third film in the Knives Out movie series, and I love these so much. All three of these movies, they're just so clever and meticulous, yet at the same time, they're also so funny and lighthearted and exciting. And I need to do an analysis for this third film because I feel like it would be really fun to deconstruct the process of the writer-director, Rian Johnson. How he hides his clues, how he misdirects his audience, how he references the classic mysteries that inspired him, and how he interweaves so much social commentary through his characters about faith, religion, influencer culture, and politics. So I've done plenty of research, reading and watching Rian Johnson's interviews where he breaks down his process, and I can't wait to share everything I've learned with you. So to break this movie down, we're going to use three themes. One, Power of Divide, where we'll discuss the creation of the series, the inspirations, Rian Johnson's religious past, the commentary on faith, and what Wix's character represents. Two, Loving Your Enemy, where we'll discuss the character of Judd, Judd's phone call with Louise, the road to Damascus reference, the religious debate between Benoit and Judd, and the constant changes in sunlight throughout the film. And three, Act of Grace. We'll discuss the structure of the mystery, the impossible crime reference, how the three murders were committed, the clues and misdirects, and the ending with Martha's confession, and so much more. Hope you enjoy. Theme number one, Power of Divide. So, as I mentioned before, Wake Up Dead Man is the third out of three films in the Knives Out mystery franchise, each film containing a completely separate story with an entirely different cast of suspects, with Detective Benoit Blanc returning each time to investigate and crack the case. As writer-director Rian Johnson describes, I think of each one of them as a novel on the shelf. And for me to best capture what Rian was aiming to say with this third movie, I think I first need to talk a little bit about how the Knives Out film series as a whole came to be. So Rian came up with the concept of the Knives Out movie series in the mid-2000s, hoping to recapture the allure and spectacle of the classic Hollywood mystery films of the mid to late 20th century, like 1974's Murder on the Orient Express, 1978's Death on the Nile, or 1982's Evil Under the Sun. Rian grew up with these films and had a very deep admiration for the whodunit mystery genre, both in film and novel form, being very well read on legendary murder case authors like Agatha Christie, Edgar Allan Poe, and John Dixon Carr. And Rian knew he could replicate that old Hollywood feel now in modern day by pulling together an A-list ensemble of actors for his suspects, placing them all in the most luxurious and extravagant setting, and then designing a freshly eccentric personality to come in and solve each and every case. That's been the formula for the past 100 years. But of course, Rian Johnson didn't want Knives Out to be formulaic. So in order to escape an outdated, antiquated feel, Rian would unapologetically soak these films in modern-day social and political commentary, overlaying themes of class warfare, wealth inequality, immigration, corporate dominance, and destructive social trends. And as we've seen, that first Knives Out leans a little more into the class and immigration side, while Glass Onion then kind of leans more into the corporate dominance and social trend side. Both of those two first films are very big in terms of what they discuss thematically. But what makes this third installment different is Rian Johnson this time has decided to go much more inward and intimate and personal. At an early SVA theater screening and Q&A hosted by J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson explains why the very personal thematic inspiration for this third film, Wake Up Dead Man. Daniel, Craig, and I both kind of agreed. We were really proud of Glass Onion. It was exactly what we wanted to make, but it would feel really good to kind of ground the next one. And so I had this idea of making it about faith and about religion. I grew up very Christian through my mid-20s, and I'm not at all anymore. I'm not a believer anymore. It was a very ingrained thing in my identity. And so today, it's something I have very deep, very personal, very complicated feelings about. And although Rian is no longer a believer, you can still see from plenty of these press interviews that he still very much has the utmost respect for religion and faith as a whole, and Christianity specifically. So he's using the film to express both his admiration for people who practice religion respectfully and his criticisms for some more abusive and manipulative religious communities. Rian discusses how some religious communities, like the camps he grew up in, would make their members feel like they were up against some kind of enemy, up against a form of evil that was the non-Christian rest of the world. And on top of this, some of their practices became oddly transactional. And Rian was so deeply caught up in this, he never really noticed these glaring ironies until he left that community. And that entire practice of manipulation and transaction through the church is represented through the central antagonist of the film, Monsignor Jefferson Wicks. And while this film is very personal and inward, the Wicks character isn't only meant to represent Rian's experience with the church. Monsignor Wicks also represents the dominant strategy of division and polarization in modern politics and influencer culture. And in an interview with Tom Power, Rian expands on this idea. If you can convince a group that they are under siege, you can convince them to do some pretty rancid stuff. And you can convince them to do some pretty terrible things if they feel like they're under attack from an existential threat. And I mean that Wicks is more than his charisma, more than his personality, more than even kind of faith. It's him putting up the castle walls and saying we're all in here together and we're under attack and we have to fight back and it's us against them. And basically, the opposite of everything Jesus actually says in the Bible. Sai even has the line in the film, show them something they hate, then make them afraid it's going to take away something they love. And it's that exact matching mentality between Wicks and Sai that has them joining forces later on in the film, which we'll certainly get into later in the video. But as you can see, before Wicks' death, his preaching strategy was to push people out with the most aggressive delivery of the most rigid stances. We see him target a single mother who birthed a child out of wedlock, a gay couple, a woman with a mask. But as Judd describes, every service instills a deeper form of loyalty in those who choose to stick around. It's growth by division. An undeniably dominant strategy in modern day politics and social media marketing and branding. And as we know, Wicks doesn't really believe in anything that he's saying. He's just playing an effective game of emotional manipulation to fuel his own ego and maximize donations. It's all for an insatiable thirst and greed for power, which is a through running theme across every single Knives Out movie. Theme number 2, loving our enemy. So in this film, we have 3 central characters, Monsignor Wicks, Father Judd, and Detective Benoit Blanc. And as Rian describes, each of these 3 characters represents a different side of Rian's personal relationship with Christianity and religion. So since we've already spoken about Wicks, I want to move on to Father Judd in another quote from the interview with Tom Power. Father Judd, who's played by Josh O'Connor, is kind of, for lack of a better term, the protagonist of the movie. And he's a very good-hearted priest. And I kind of put everything that I genuinely love about Christianity and what it's all about to me into him. Wicks is where I put all the stuff that I don't feel so great about in Christianity. Judgment and us against them, and sort of the notion of fighting the world for the church. The theme of Judd's entire journey in this film is the resistance to temptation. The very first scene of the entire film is him hitting a deacon, giving in to his impulse of rage. But in the very next scene, we learn this is an incredibly warm-hearted, loving young man. Judd even challenges his own fellow priests when they tell him, we need fighters today, but to fight the world. Again, replicating that us against them mentality. And even more cleverly, to further emphasize this opening theme, the scene is set on a basketball court on 2 opposing sides for competing teams. Fortunately, Bishop Langstrom sees Judd for the peacemaker he truly is. So this character is based on Rian Johnson himself in the past, as he battles with his inner feelings of temptation, skepticism, and disloyalty to his church, which is confirmed when he discusses his process of writing the character at a Netflix screening Q&A. I realized I had to put myself back. I had to genuinely dig back in and find kind of when I was a Christian and the things that inspired me. and to this day I still believe are genuinely good things. And throughout the film, this internal battle of temptation continues. He struggles to simmer his feelings of rage for the damage Wicks is doing to his members. And Wicks, of course, representing the darker side of religion and influence, encourages Judd to give in to his impulses, just as Wicks so shamelessly does all his life. And even when Wicks is eliminated from the picture, Judd's temptations toward vengeance and rage only get stronger. He is so caught up in retribution for the real killer who is trying to frame him for murder. However, just a little over halfway through the film, Judd has a phone call that sets him right back on the path that he was meant for. Judd is on the phone with Louise, the construction company receptionist, and he's paying so little attention to what she has to say because he's so focused on the case, defeating the enemy, when suddenly he realizes she needs him to pray for her. And in that moment, the camera closes up on the smashed Jesus figure, symbolizing how heavily Judd has lost track with who he truly is, and why he came to the church in the first place. Judd describes this realization as a road to Damascus moment, which, to describe very briefly, refers to the biblical event where Saul, a persecutor of Christians, suddenly had a vision of the resurrected Jesus, which led him to becoming a key missionary for Christians, from then on known as Jesus' Apostle Paul. This story in the modern world metaphorically represents a moment of spiritual or religious awakening, or a change of heart. And this actually isn't the only time we see a road to Damascus moment in the film. It happens in one more instance for one more character, Benoit Blanc. So let's talk about the character arc of Benoit leading up to that climactic moment. Because, as Rian Johnson says, Benoit maybe has the biggest personal journey in this film. So, about 40 minutes into the film, Benoit is finally introduced to the story. And we hear he isn't religious at all. He's a proud heretic. And in proud heretic fashion, he unabashedly spills all of his skepticism toward Catholicism and the Holy Bible, mentioning malevolence, misogyny, homophobia, and many other criticisms. And in Judd's response, he's so open and non-judgmental, completely accepting of Benoit's perspective and appreciative of his honesty. And within his response, he proposes the most effortlessly eye-opening question. Do these stories convince us of a lie, or do they resonate with something deep inside us that's profoundly true? And in that Tom Power interview, Ryan discusses how that conversation between Judd and Benoit represents his own inner dialogue about Christianity. For me, the entire dialogue for myself of having both of those characters inside me and letting them talk was a big part of it. There's something ineffable in this world. There's a spirit. There is something we can't make sense of. There's something unspeakable in this world around us that guides us, that maybe we have uncovered, but we don't have language for. So we tell stories because that's the closest approximation of it that we have. And a visual technique used in this scene that I think makes it all the more effective is the manipulation of the light through the church windows. Using lights connected to light control computers, the team would darken and lighten the scene as if clouds were passing over the sun in correlation with the emotions of the dialogue of the characters. When Benoit expresses his cynicism toward religion, the scene darkens. When Judd proposes that open-minded question, the sun begins to shine through again. And the scene where the church is at its most illuminated is when Benoit has his road to Damascus moment at the very end of the film, when the entire mystery is solved. So let's discuss what that moment means while completely deconstructing the crimes, clues, and misdirects in theme number 3, Act of Grace. So as mentioned before, Rian Johnson's Knives Out films are heavily influenced by the Agatha Christie novels and their many Hollywood adaptations over the past 100 years. And since from a stylistic standpoint, the last film, Glass Onion, leaned so much more into the light-hearted vacation comedic romp genre of whodunit mysteries, Rian wanted Wake Up Dead Man to swing in the complete opposite direction with a darker, grayer, more dreadful metallic gothic tone, heavily inspired by the tales of Edgar Allan Poe and the novels of John Dickson Carr. And as I mentioned way earlier in the video, a John Dickson Carr novel makes an appearance in the film titled The Hollow Man. And it's very clear why Rian chose to reference this book specifically, because this book establishes the exact type of mystery structure we are seeing in Wake Up Dead Man. So the type of mystery structure in The Hollow Man is known as the locked room mystery, also known as the impossible crime. And what these types of cases are crimes that seem like they were impossible to commit. For example, a victim walking into and locking a room alone with no ways in or out. And moments later, that victim is found dead, just like how Wicks was killed in the movie. And the philosophy of the classic locked room case highlights the illusion of impossibility and how belief, misdirection, and human error can make crimes sometimes feel supernatural. And that exact philosophy presented by the book gives the film the perfect stage to discuss spirituality, religion, and faith through the lens of a classic whodunit mystery. So finally, let's get into the technicals. So 1, how each of the 3 murders was committed. 2, the clues and misdirects leading into each of them. And 3, the conclusion of the film, including Benoit's road to Damascus moment. So going back to the very start of the crime, here's a super brief summary of how Wicks, Samson, and Nat were all killed. And unlike the film does, I'll describe the events of all 3 crimes in perfect chronological order. So to prove to Judd that Wicks was trustworthy, Martha confessed to Wicks where the jewel fortune was, in the corpse of his grandfather in the mausoleum. However, since Wicks of course isn't trustworthy, he began conspiring with his real biological son, Cy, to abandon the church members and use the fortune to pursue a greater form of power in politics and social media. When Martha realized this, she conspired with Nat to take Wicks out. So together, they spiked Wicks' flask with Nat's medical tranquilizer. And after Wicks passed out and fell down, Nat used a remote to trigger a blood squib in a fake dagger handle painted red to blend into Wicks' cloak, which it was sewn onto. And when Nat got to the body after he already let Judd touch the fake bloody dagger handle, he switched the sewn dagger handle for a real dagger with the same head to finally stab and kill Wicks. And to quickly distract everyone from the stabbing, Martha screams in terror from the opposite side of the room. And the entire reason Martha is doing this is to uphold the image of the church she holds so dearly to her heart. So even though she's killing Wicks and knows how terrible he is, she still wants to uphold his name and give him a legacy, because if Wicks has a holy legacy, the church has a holy legacy. So at the time of Wicks' burial in the mausoleum, she switches out Wicks' body and has her lover Samson switch in, so that later Nat could pretend to be Samson and Samson could pretend to be Wicks coming back from the dead in the sort of fake divine resurrection of Wicks. And in the same moment, Samson could retrieve the swallowed fortune jewel from the corpse of Wicks' grandfather for no one else to have ever again. And the moment was only supposed to be caught on security cam, but as you know, Judd happened to show up at the perfect time and witnessed the event from afar. And when he chased Nat and Samson down, who he thought was Samson and a resurrected Wicks, Samson had to knock him out. But also what Martha and Samson didn't expect is when Nat saw the fortune jewel, he killed Samson to have it for himself. And when Martha realized this, she went to visit Nat, who was dissolving Wicks' body. And knowing he was a traitor, she switched the cups when he wasn't looking for him to poison himself instead of her. And then she herself dissolved Nat's body in the tub. And while this is how these crimes went down within the reality of this film, there are plenty of misdirect techniques that Rian Johnson uses as the director that are super interesting and fun to talk about, so let's discuss those. So one very fascinating example is when Judd accidentally interferes with the false resurrection scheme and he gets knocked out by Samson. We see him wake up to this surreal vision of Wicks standing above him in the darkness. And for us, as the audience, we believe this is simply Wicks in reality standing above him, because we just saw what we thought was him, resurrected walking out of the mausoleum. But this haunting imagery of Wicks is only a dream sequence within Judd's head, fueled by his paranoia for all of his guilt. And another really cool misdirect technique Rian uses is the mask of humor. And I'll let him explain what that is in that interview with Tom Power. You have to get good at planning things early. I've learned one really great tool in the toolbox with these movies is humor. I found that if you can plant a clue in a joke and make an audience laugh, they'll think that was the point of it. They'll be less apt to tag it in their head and say, oh, I bet that's coming back. And one way Rian implements this technique is through the humorous gag of Martha's jump scares. Throughout the film, Martha is known to pop up in unexpected places and as well suddenly scream, which often frightens the other characters as well as the audience. While we see it as simply a running gag, this was one of the most critical steps in executing Wicks's murder. She screams in terror several seconds after seeing Wicks's dead body, and we simply think of it as a gag because she's freaked out. But it worked in getting the entire church to look the other direction as well as the audience. She also herself, as a character, is largely a comic relief character with her outbursts and ironically profane language. In one instance, we simply find it funny how dramatic she's being, falling to the floor crying, but really she's trying to distract Benoit and Geraldine from solving the case at the site of the crime. And in a much more minor instance, we see the gag of the teenagers' vandalism on the mausoleum earlier on in the film, while important information about the Lazarus door is being explained by Samson. And the joke about the devil-related merchandise gradually filling the bar over the years diverts our attention away from the second missing wolf head on the second lamp in that wide shot of all the devil-related merchandise. And finally, maybe most notably, we humorously hear through Judd's narration when introducing the character of Martha that she knows where the bodies are buried. But that line sounds so much more humorous than it does sound leading until you watch the film for a second time. So, having gone over the explanation of the crimes and the clues and the misdirects, now let's discuss how the structure of the mystery and the personal theme of faith finally come together in the finale. So as we see in the finale, Benoit presents to the audience his solution to the mystery of Wicks's death. However, after a beam of sunlight comes shooting through the church windows onto Benoit, Benoit now, as he claims, has his road to Damascus moment. And he therefore refuses to explain the rest of the crime, who killed Samson and Nat. Earlier in the film, when Judd believed he killed Samson and needed to confess, he said to Benoit, "I have to do it of my own free will, or it won't mean anything." And in the next shot, we see that this statement really resonates with Benoit when he hears it. Therefore, Benoit is withholding his proof of Martha's guilt because he knows that Martha needs to confess herself. Benoit is aware that she has just ingested the pentobarbital out of the shame of what she's done, so she only has minutes left to live. And although he doesn't believe in her heaven or her God, he knows that she herself needs more than ever to be absolved of her greatest sin before she passes on. In the spirit of Judd, Benoit has just performed an act of complete selflessness, sacrificing his pride and passion in exchange for the salvation of a killer. Salvation he doesn't even believe in. And on top of this, in this finale, both Judd and Benoit resist the ultimate symbol of temptation, the fortune jewel, which is why it's called Eve's apple. And Martha is given her own arc as well, as Judd guides Martha into confessing for her sins against Wicks, Nat, Samson, and finally Grace, asking the Spirit of Grace for her forgiveness. And in the very most poetic conclusion to the film, Judd renames now his church from Our Lady of Perpetual Fortitude to Our Lady of Perpetual Grace, as grace and selflessness is the major theme of the film's third act. As Benoit says, to most beautifully encapsulate the sentiment of this movie, grace for the broken, grace for those who deserve it the least, but who need it the most. All right, that's my analysis. I'm super excited to hear what you think on the thematic side with faith and religion, but I'm also really interested to hear maybe in terms of the structure, what you may have noticed that I didn't in terms of maybe clues or misdirects or little strategies that Rian Johnson is using. I think it'd be really interesting to hear from both sides. So again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you later.